Why was the general watching her so closely? Hayes bent low, the sun catching in the brass casing she was scooping from the concrete. To anyone else, she was just another maintenance worker on the range, invisible, unremarkable, easily forgotten. But the eyes on her back weren't casual. They carried weight. They carried memory. And she felt it like a needle of ice between her shoulder blades. She forced herself to stay steady. The bucket clinked as another handful of shell casing slid in. Just another worker, just another routine morning. That's what they had to see. That's what they always saw. But not him. General Harrison didn't do casual glances. He was a man who noticed things for a living. His attention was detail sharpened by 40 years of command, and today it had snagged on her. On the way she moved. On the small, faded patch barely visible under the edge of her sleeve, a symbol not supposed to exist anymore. The 3,100-meter Brotherhood. A ghost unit. A name erased from records. Every man and woman who had worn that insignia was supposed to be dead, scattered in the wreckage of a mission so classified that even its failure had never been spoken aloud. Yet here she was. Knew she should have removed that patch years ago. She told herself it was foolish, sentimental, dangerous, but she'd kept it anyway, because sometimes survival wasn't enough. Sometimes you needed proof you hadn't imagined the person you once were, proof that it all really happened, proof that the blood spilled had meant something. And now, because of that stubborn need, everything was unraveling. She kept moving, bending, scooping, sorting brass into the compartments of her bucket, 9 pistol, 5.56 rifle, the occasional heavy round. Her body remembered the motions. Her mind was elsewhere, calculating, searching for exits. 3 years. That's how long she'd managed to stay hidden in plain sight. 3 years of blending into the unnoticed machinery of the base. 32 years old and already twice reborn. Once as a soldier, once as a ghost. She had worn invisibility like armor. She had believed it could hold. But Harrison had seen. She felt the moment his recognition landed, like an explosion she couldn't hear but could feel rippling through her chest. Her pulse ticked higher. She slowed her breathing, controlling the rise and fall of her chest, as if calm could somehow mask the storm building inside. The recruits firing downrange never looked at her. The instructors barked their orders, oblivious. The whole range buzzed with routine, blind to the moment hanging in the air like a tripwire. Harrison said nothing. He didn't call out. He didn't summon security. That was worse, because silence meant calculation. Silence meant he was remembering things, files, reports, names of people who were supposed to be gone forever. And she knew exactly what he was deciding, whether the woman in front of him was a survivor or a threat. Bent picked up another casing. Her hand shook once, just enough to make the brass slip from her fingers and bounce across the concrete. She clenched her jaw until the tremor passed. Weakness wasn't allowed. Not here. Not ever. She lifted her head just enough to glance toward him. He stood near the observation area, posture stiff, eyes locked on her like crosshairs. She knew that look. She'd worn it herself on missions. The look of someone who saw more than they should, someone who was preparing for the possibility of violence. And beneath it something else, recognition. She turned away before her expression betrayed her, walked with deliberate slowness to the next scatter of brass, the bucket steady in her grip. Inside, her mind was racing. She needed to disappear. Not now, not visibly, but soon. Maybe tonight. Maybe before dawn. Because once a man like Harrison looked at you that way, the clock started ticking. She told herself she should never have come here in the first place. A military base was the worst possible hiding place for someone like her. But Fort Bridgewater had offered the one thing she craved: structure without scrutiny, routines, silence, anonymity, and she had believed it could last. Now she tasted the bitter truth in the back of her throat. This was over. Still, she moved calmly through her pattern, filling the bucket, ignoring the burn in her knees, ignoring the weight of his gaze. She passed near him once, close enough to see the lines carved into his face, close enough to hear his aide murmuring into a tablet. She kept her eyes down, nodded as if in respect, and he nodded back automatically. A soldier's reflex. But then just as she was about to leave the range, he lifted his phone. His posture changed. His voice dropped low, sharp, urgent. Didn't need to hear the words. She knew what that kind of call meant. It meant her name would be in files again before the hour was out. It meant her face would be scanned against ghosts that weren't supposed to exist. It meant the invisible life she had built, the quiet apartment, the groceries, the books by her bedside, was already gone. Her heart hurt at that thought more than she expected. She had told herself she didn't care about this life, that it was only camouflage. But she had grown used to it, grown protective of it. She had started to believe she might deserve it. Now it was slipping away, and the old self, the self she thought she had buried, was rising again. As she climbed into her utility vehicle and started the engine, she caught one last glimpse of Harrison in the mirror. He was still on the phone, still watching her. A commander who had just stumbled across a ghost. She drove steadily, unhurried, following the same route she always did back to the maintenance facility. Nothing in her body language betrayed the war inside her chest, but her mind was alive with calculations, escape routes, dead drops, codes she hadn't touched in years. This was it, the day she had prepared for in silence, the day she had prayed would never come. Hayes was no longer invisible. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the fear, beneath the grief, beneath the fragile hope she had carried like glass in her hands, something else stirred. Something she thought she had killed the night the Brotherhood died. The soldier. What did the general see when he looked at her file? Parked the utility cart in its usual spot, hands steady on the wheel though her chest felt like it was caving in. She lifted the bucket of brass, unloaded it with the same rhythm as every other day. Routine was armor. Habit was survival. Anyone watching would see nothing unusual, but she knew better. Because somewhere across the base, Harrison's aide was already pulling up her records. Records that weren't real. Records stitched together by people who specialized in lies that held up under casual inspection, but frayed when someone with eyes like his looked too closely. She wiped her palms against her thighs, the faint sting of sweat against fabric grounding her. She'd always known this could happen, that the camouflage of ordinary life wasn't perfect, that a single detail, a patch, a glance, a slip could expose her. And now it had. She forced herself through the motions of her shift, cleaning equipment, signing checklists, trading polite nods with who never noticed the storm beneath her skin. She spoke when spoken to, smiled when expected, walked where she always walked. Inside, she was unspooling plans she hadn't touched in 3 years. The first was simple: disappear, go to ground, activate caches hidden around the base, a burner phone in a vent, spare currency behind a false panel in the maintenance shed, IDs under a loose floorboard in her apartment. She had rehearsed every step. But part of her resisted. Not yet, it whispered. Maybe it wasn't over. Maybe Harrison hadn't been sure. Maybe the call had been about something else. She almost laughed at herself for that flicker of hope. She had survived this long by refusing to believe in luck, by trusting only discipline, planning, instinct. And instinct told her the general had recognized her. She finished her tasks, handed in her log sheet, and walked out into the late afternoon sun. The base hummed as it always did, recruits drilling, trucks rumbling, helicopters thudding overhead. The sound of a machine too big to notice one invisible woman. But she knew the truth. Somewhere behind office doors, her name was being spoken in tones that carried weight. Somewhere, men in uniforms were asking questions. And somewhere, a file that should have buried her forever was being opened again. General Harrison sat behind his desk, the personnel file spread open like a puzzle missing half its pieces. Hayes, 32, civilian employee maintenance crew, prior service, supply specialist 4 years, honorable discharge, evaluations positive but bland, employment history thin but consistent. On the surface, she was exactly what she appeared: competent, unremarkable, invisible. But Harrison's instincts didn't buy it. Too clean, too simple. He traced his finger down the pages, pausing where the timeline frayed. A 6-month gap after discharge. A civilian job with references that felt rehearsed. He had read enough records in his career to know the fingerprints of an intelligence brush-up when he saw one. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. The Brotherhood had been small, 20 at most. Every face, every name had been drilled into his memory when he'd reviewed the classified reports years ago. And though time and anonymity blurred identities, he swore he had seen her before. He lifted the secure phone from his desk and dialed a number few men were cleared to call. The line clicked, encrypted. "I need confirmation," he said, voice low. "Hayes, maintenance crew, Fort Bridgewater. I think she's someone else." The pause on the other end told him enough. Even silence carried weight in this world. Finally, a voice, measured, careful. "General, I can neither confirm nor deny specifics. What I can tell you is this: if she is who you think, then her presence there is intentional, managed, and you are advised to proceed cautiously." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Managed? She's on my base, my responsibility." "Your responsibility," the voice said, "is to keep your base running smoothly. Her responsibility is complicated. Interfering may compromise operations you are not read into. Do you understand?" He didn't answer. Not immediately, because what he understood was that someone was telling him to look away, to ignore the instincts that had kept him alive, to treat a ghost like she was just another civilian. But ghosts had a way of bringing the past with them. When he hung up, his aide was waiting by the door. "Sir." Harrison rubbed a hand across his face, the file still open on the desk. "Flag this, eyes only, no copies, and not a word to anyone else." "Yes, sir." He glanced at the range map pinned to his wall. He could still see her there, bent over, picking up brass with the efficiency of someone who had sorted rounds by touch in the middle of a firefight. If she was Brotherhood, if she had survived when the rest hadn't, then she was more dangerous than anyone here could imagine. And yet more human too. Survivors always carried both. His apartment was quiet when she entered, too quiet. She locked the door behind her and stood still, listening. Training never left you. She checked corners, shadows, the faint disturbances that said whether a room had been entered. Nothing, for now. She exhaled, let her bag slip to the floor. The walls here had been hers for 3 years. The photographs on the fridge, the books stacked by the couch, the plain dishes drying by the sink, all carefully chosen pieces of camouflage. Ordinary life as costume. She moved through the space, her hands touching the hidden anchors of her real self. A hollowed book on the shelf with a rolled map inside. A false bottom in the dresser with a handgun, disassembled. A floorboard beneath the bed that concealed cash and IDs. Every item was both comfort and curse, proof that she had never truly believed in safety. She sat at the edge of the bed and let her head drop into her hands. The weight pressed down harder than it had in years. She thought of the recruits at the range that morning, their rifles trembling in unsteady hands. She thought of the instructors barking orders, confident but flawed. She thought of herself, bending, scooping brass, pretending not to notice the general's eyes. She thought of the patch, the damned patch. Why hadn't she cut it away? Why had she carried that piece of thread in memory all this time? She told herself it was honor, or defiance, or survival, but tonight it felt like betrayal. Because that little symbol had undone everything. She rose and moved to the bathroom mirror, stared at the face staring back. It wasn't remarkable, not striking. That was the point. But behind the forgettable features, behind the practiced calm, something else stirred. The soldier, the sniper, the survivor. She pressed her palms flat against the sink, leaned close, whispered to the glass, "Not yet, don't come back yet." But she didn't believe it. Across the base, Harrison stared out his office window into the night. He thought of men and women he had buried, names he couldn't speak, missions he couldn't admit existed. He thought of the Brotherhood not as legends but as human beings. Young, sharp, dedicated, dead, or so he had believed. Now one of them walked his base as a civilian. And maybe that was a problem. Or maybe it was a reminder. He poured a measure of whiskey into a glass, drank it neat. The burn steadied him. He thought of Hayes's face, the fleeting defiance in her eyes as she realized she'd been recognized. Not arrogance, not recklessness, something else. Something like sorrow. And he wondered what she carried. What weight had bent her into invisibility? What ghosts had kept her gathering brass instead of living free? He knew one thing for certain: this wasn't finished. Not for her, not for him, not for the Brotherhood. Lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, every nerve alert. She had planned for this day. She had rehearsed it in her mind 100 times, but imagining and living were never the same. Her phone buzzed once faintly. A message disguised as junk text, but she recognized the pattern. 3 numbers, a code. She sat up slowly, heart pounding. It was time. Time to move. Time to become someone else again. And in the silence of that moment, she let herself mourn the ordinary life she was leaving behind. The fragile peace that had almost felt real. The version of herself who had believed invisibility was enough. She whispered goodbye to Hayes. And in the darkness, the soldier began to rise. How do you leave a life you've built when every piece of it was a lie? Sat in silence, the glow of the cheap lamp painting her apartment in shadows. Around her, the objects of her camouflage looked hollow. The mugs on the counter, the folded laundry, the unopened mail, all of it had been scaffolding for an identity she could no longer wear. She moved through the space with the calm of someone dismantling a stage set, gathering the only things that mattered: the hidden caches, the prepared tools, the fragments of the soldier she had never truly stopped being. The floorboard creaked softly as she lifted it, pulling out the steel case beneath. Inside lay a collection of past lives: forged passports, untraceable credit cards, stacks of cash, a disassembled sidearm wrapped in oilcloth. She touched each piece with reverence, as if confirming that the future was still possible. But with every motion, grief pressed harder on her chest. She wasn't just leaving a place. She was leaving the fragile peace she had managed to build. The neighbors who nodded politely but left her alone. The smell of coffee in the mornings. The faint illusion of belonging to a world where life was simple. It was all over. She sat back, breathing shallowly, fighting the ache that rose unbidden. Not now, not when she needed to be still, but the ache whispered anyway. A voice she tried not to hear: "You'll never stop running. You'll never be free." She shook her head, shoved the thought down, and returned to her task. Survival wasn't about hope. It was about discipline, about moving before they moved you. By dawn, the apartment no longer looked like hers. The bed was neatly made, the counters wiped clean, the staged life frozen in place for anyone who came looking. But Hayes was gone. What remained was only shadow. At headquarters, General Harrison set the thin personnel file aside and opened another drawer. From the depths, a folder stamped with layers of red. Classified, COMPRTMENTLIZED, access restricted. The 3,100-meter Brotherhood. He hadn't read it in years. He remembered too well the weight of those pages the first time. He flipped it open, scanning names, faces, mission summaries that never officially existed. He found the insignia he had recognized, the stylized crosshair over a mountain silhouette. He remembered the stories whispered in hallways, of shots made across valleys, of targets eliminated before they even knew they were being watched. The Brotherhood had been lethal, precise, unnervingly independent. And then came the operation that broke them. A mission in a foreign country whose name was still redacted even here. A mission that should have ended quickly but stretched into days of blood and fire. Half the unit lost. The survivors scattered, debriefed, retired into silence. Officially, no one survived intact. Unofficially, his eyes paused on one page. A sniper, female, call sign redacted, record incomplete, psychological evaluation marked with black ink that bled into nothingness. He looked again at the face he had seen on the range. Unremarkable, forgettable, until you looked too closely. Hayes, he muttered, or whatever your name really is. His aide knocked softly on the door. Sir, the counterintelligence division confirms. I know what they confirm, Harrison cut in, sharper than he meant. She's not who she says she is, and she's not here by accident. Orders? Asked carefully. Harrison leaned back, the classified folder heavy in his lap. Orders. That was the question, wasn't it? To act was to interfere with something bigger than him. To ignore was to risk letting a ghost walk free on his base. He rubbed his temple, the whiskey from last night still lingering in his blood. No orders yet, he said finally. We wait, we watch, and we prepare for the worst. Drove through the base gates that evening, every muscle taut. She handed her ID to the young corporal, who studied it longer than usual, glancing at a screen she couldn't see. His eyes flicked up, nervous, uncertain. Have a good night, Ms. Hayes, he said finally, voice too bright, too forced. She gave a tight smile, took the card, and drove on. Her pulse slowed only once she was beyond the perimeter, headlights washing over civilian streets. They knew not everything, not yet, but enough. The walls were closing. 10 minutes later, she pulled into her apartment lot, parked as usual, walked inside like it was any other day. But tonight was different. Tonight she wouldn't sleep. Tonight she wouldn't wake here again. She moved quickly now, methodically, pulling the final caches, stripping away the camouflage. In the mirror, she caught sight of herself, uniform still crisp, hair still pinned in regulation style. But the illusion was fading. Hayes was a mask, and it had cracked. She stripped it away piece by piece. The uniform folded into the closet. The ID card dropped onto the counter. The patch, the tiny, treacherous insignia that had undone her, cut away with a knife and burned in a dish until it was nothing but ash. Yet as the smoke curled, she felt the lie of it. The symbol might be gone, but the soldier remained. Always. At the Pentagon, Harrison's recognition had already triggered ripples. Secure lines buzzed with coded chatter. Analysts whispered about Brotherhood survivors. Questions spread like cracks in glass. If one had survived, how many others? Where were they? What were they waiting for? And what would they do if forced to rise again? Loaded the last of her equipment into a nondescript duffel. She took one final look at the apartment. The books on the shelf, the dishes in the sink, the photograph of a landscape she had never actually visited. For 3 years, she had let herself believe in the illusion. For 3 years, she had dared to imagine she might belong among ordinary people. Now it was gone. She switched off the lights, stepped into the night, and closed the door behind her. The lock clicked softly, final. She was a ghost again. But ghosts don't walk unnoticed forever. General Harrison sat alone in his office as the base lights twinkled beyond the glass. He thought of her, driving away, unaware that his recognition had set events into motion beyond either of their control. He thought of the patch, of the look in her eyes when she realized she had been seen, and of the haunting truth that some soldiers never truly come home. He whispered to the empty room, though the words were not for him. I hope you find peace, whoever you are. But he knew peace was the one thing ghosts could never keep. How do you walk away from a life while pretending nothing has changed? Drove out of the apartment complex just before dawn, the duffel bag on the passenger seat, her eyes scanning every mirror. To any casual observer, she was another civilian heading to an early shift. But inside the vehicle, tension buzzed like static. Every shadow looked like surveillance. Every car behind her felt too close. She kept her speed exact, not a mile over or under the limit. The trick wasn't to disappear in a blaze of speed. It was to vanish inside the current, unremarkable, unseen. The streets were empty. The world was waking, and she was leaving it behind. She turned onto the interstate, merging smoothly into the pale stream of headlights. The exit signs slid past, familiar names, familiar routes, all fading now into the ahead stretched only uncertainty. She reached for the burner phone in her pocket, powered it on. The screen lit with a single message, preloaded and waiting for years. Condition black. Execute protocols. Her thumb hovered. She hesitated. Once she pressed send, there was no going back. The old network would stir, caches would awaken, people who had buried their past would feel it pulse again. She closed her eyes, let out a slow breath, and tapped the screen. The message vanished into encrypted channels, bouncing through servers that didn't officially exist. By the time it landed, she was just another car in morning traffic. And yet the world was different now. The Brotherhood was stirring. At Fort Bridgewater, Harrison pored over the updates flooding his desk. Intelligence agencies wanted answers. His recognition of a ghost had already triggered alarms he couldn't silence. He sat in silence as read the report. Sir, counterintelligence confirms the possibility that Hayes, if that's her real name, was processed under post-Brotherhood integration protocols. Harrison's jaw tightened, which means, said carefully, her identity, her employment here, all of it was arranged, controlled, monitored. Yes, sir. Harrison leaned back, exhaling through his nose. So he had been right. She wasn't a mistake in the system. She was the system, an invisible piece of someone else's plan. The question wasn't whether she was dangerous. The question was whether she was still theirs or already gone. He rubbed his temple, and if she's gone. Didn't answer. She didn't have to. They both knew what it meant. If Hayes slipped free of the leash, the consequences could spread far beyond their base. Pulled off at a rest stop, parking between trucks that towered over her sedan. She killed the engine, scanned the lot, then slipped out with her duffel. Her boots crunched gravel softly. Behind a row of vending machines, hidden in a hollow she'd prepared long ago, lay the first of her contingency caches. She knelt, fingers brushing dirt, and uncovered the black case beneath. Inside, a second set of IDs, different names, different faces. More currency, more tools. She swapped out the phone for another, smaller, cleaner. Checked the weapon, loaded the magazine with a steady click. Every action felt like a heartbeat she hadn't felt in years. Familiar, too familiar. She caught herself smiling, then froze, smiling at this. It chilled her. She shut the case, buried it again, erased every trace. Then she returned to her car, duffel heavier, heart heavier still. Driving back onto the highway, she whispered to herself, as if confessing, "You're not invisible anymore." In his office, Harrison weighed the impossible. He could order her detained. Call it security protocol, call it precaution. But even as the thought formed, he knew the risks. A soldier like her wouldn't come quietly. An attempt to cage her might turn the base into a battlefield. And more than that, she had earned something. He didn't know the details, but the fragments in the files spoke of sacrifice, survival beyond reason. People like her carried scars that didn't show on paper. Still, his duty was clear. Protect the base, protect his people, report the threat. He stared at the folder, his hand resting on the insignia photo, the Brotherhood's mark. He remembered seeing it once years ago in the dirt beside a body that had never been officially recovered. He remembered thinking, what kind of war makes people like this? Now he knew the answer, this kind. The wars that never ended. The ones fought in shadows, even after the shooting stopped. Pulled into a gas station on the edge of a small town, filled the tank, and walked inside to buy a coffee. The cashier smiled politely, rang her up, asked about the weather. Ordinary small talk, the kind she had lived on for years. But now it felt strange, like speaking a language she no longer belonged to. She sipped the coffee as she drove away, bitter and hot. It reminded her of nights on Overwatch, cradling a rifle through the long hours, staring through glass at targets who never knew she was there. She shivered. She had promised herself she'd left that life behind. But it had found her again. It always would. Harrison's phone buzzed. He lifted it, listened as the voice on the other end delivered the update. General, the subject has left her residence. Civilian monitoring confirms she has activated contingency protocols. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. His grip tightened, so we're letting her walk. This is bigger than you, Harrison. Decisions are above your pay grade. Maintain observation only. The line clicked dead. He lowered the phone slowly, staring at it as if it might explain the madness. They wanted her free. They wanted her moving. Which meant one thing: they wanted to see where she went. He leaned back, the ache in his chest heavier than before. What was she walking toward? Or worse, what was walking toward her? Night fell as turned off the highway, heading into back roads that twisted through dark woods. Her headlights cut tunnels of light through the trees, the silence pressing close around her. She stopped at a gravel turnout, killed the lights, and sat in the dark. This was the hardest part: the waiting, the listening, the awareness that you were both hunter and hunted. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel, let her breath slow. The quiet wrapped around her. But quiet wasn't peace. Quiet was only the space before the storm. She knew it, felt it in her bones. She wasn't just running. She was being pulled. Back into a world she had sworn to bury. Back into the shadow of the Brotherhood. In his office, Harrison poured another drink. He thought of her face at the range, the way she had nodded politely as if nothing was wrong. He thought of the recruits, laughing, learning, blind to the ghost in their midst. He thought of the insignia, stitched in secret, carried like a wound. And he wondered if some wars never ended, not because governments demanded it, but because soldiers carried them inside forever. He lifted the glass, held it against the light. God help her, he whispered. God help us all. Closed her eyes in the darkened car, hand resting on the weapon in her lap. She whispered a truth she hadn't spoken in years. You're not Hayes, not anymore. The words echoed in the stillness. And the silence answered back. What happens when ghosts start answering calls? Waited in the gravel turnout, the burner phone heavy in her palm. It buzzed once, the vibration running up her wrist like a pulse. She hesitated before answering. Some part of her still longed for silence, for anonymity, for peace. But peace was gone. She lifted the phone. Yes. The voice on the other end was distorted, mechanical, layered. But she recognized the cadence beneath it, the way words clipped short, efficient. You triggered condition black. Her throat tightened. Who else got it? A pause, then enough. Her breath caught. Enough. The single word carried more weight than any reassurance could. If others had received the code, if others were stirring, then she wasn't the only one who had survived. The Brotherhood wasn't entirely dead. She closed her eyes, let the realization wash over her. Years of mourning, of believing she was the last, the only, the broken remnant, undone by a single word. But hope was dangerous. Hope clouded judgment. Status, the voice asked. Compromised, she said. Base command recognized me. General Harrison. Another pause, longer this time. Finally, you're moving. Yes. Then keep moving. Rendezvous will be arranged. Code to follow. The line went dead. Lowered the phone, heart pounding. She stared out into the darkness, the trees whispering in the night breeze. She wasn't alone, not anymore. and the weight of that truth scared her more than solitude ever had. At Fort Bridgewater, Harrison stared at the new report had placed on his desk. His gut twisted as he read the words. Condition black signal detected. Multiple activations across encrypted channels. Activity traced to at least 3 continents. He lowered the paper slowly. God help us. His voice was tight. Sir, are you saying? I'm saying the Brotherhood wasn't erased. Not completely. Survivors scattered, buried, and now something's waking them up. Shifted uneasily. Then Hayes isn't just a rogue civilian, she's a signal flare. Harrison nodded grimly. That was exactly it. She wasn't the danger herself. She was the proof. Proof that history had been rewritten. Proof that ghosts could still bleed. And if others were out there, answering the same call. The implications spread like cracks in ice. Drove deeper into the countryside, following no map, no path, just instinct. The rendezvous code would come. She didn't know when, she didn't know where. Until then, she had to survive. She stopped at a small roadside motel, the kind that smelled of dust and disinfectant. Paid cash. No ID. Room key heavy in her hand. Inside, she dropped her duffel on the bed and sat in the silence. Her body ached from the tension, but sleep felt impossible. She stared at the ceiling, every muscle taut, mind replaying the voice on the phone. Enough. The word wouldn't leave her. If they were alive, if even a handful had survived, what had they been doing all these years? Hiding, fighting, pretending to be normal like her. And why now? Why were they being stirred awake? Her mind circled the questions until exhaustion pulled her under. Harrison met with the intelligence liaison the next morning in a secure conference room. A woman in a gray suit, eyes sharp, tone colder than steel. We're aware of the activations, she said. Your role is simple, contain your base. Don't pursue Hayes. Contain, Harrison repeated, voice flat. She's on the run if she links with others. That's not your concern. His jaw clenched. With respect, everything on my base is my concern. Her eyes flicked toward him, unblinking. Not this. Let her go. We're watching the network. We want to see where it leads. And if it leads to something we can't control. Her silence was answer enough. Harrison leaned forward, voice low. These were my people once. I may not have commanded them, but I knew what they were. They were soldiers, not machines, not pawns. The liaison's expression didn't shift. Soldiers don't get to choose when the war ends. And just like that, the meeting was over. Harrison sat alone after she left, the words echoing. Soldiers don't get to choose when the war ends. He wondered if that was true, or if Hayes might be proof that sometimes they did. Woke to the buzz of the phone. She snapped upright, heart hammering, hand on the weapon beside her. The screen glowed with a new message, coordinates, a time. She exhaled slowly. It was real. The rendezvous was set. She packed quickly, efficiently, erasing all trace of herself from the room. As she slid the key across the counter, the clerk smiled drowsily, unaware that the woman in front of him was walking into the shadows of a forgotten war. On the road again, followed the map in her head, the numbers translating into valleys, ridges, landmarks only a sniper would notice. The Brotherhood had always spoken in geography, in terrain, in lines of sight. Even their codes were written in the language of landscapes. Hours later, she arrived at an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the woods. The roof sagged, the paint peeled, but the structure stood. She approached cautiously, weapon low but ready. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of her boots. A knock, 3 taps, 1 pause, 2 taps, the old pattern. The door creaked open, and a voice she hadn't heard in years whispered, I knew you'd make it. Froze, her chest clenched. Standing before her was a man she had thought long dead. A brother. At the base, Harrison read the fresh update with grim clarity. Hayes has gone to ground. Contact with at least one other survivor confirmed. His voice shook. So it's true, the Brotherhood's not gone. Harrison closed the file slowly. No, and if they're together again, then the world just changed. He looked out the window, the base alive with drills, recruits laughing in the distance. Ordinary soldiers living ordinary lives. And somewhere out there, ghosts were gathering. Ghosts who once took a shot no one else could take. Ghosts who had never stopped fighting. Stood in the doorway, staring at the man she once trusted with her life. His hair was grayer now, his eyes lined with years. But beneath it she saw the same fire, the same relentless strength. Her throat tightened, she forced the words out. I buried you. He smiled faintly. We all buried someone, just not ourselves. Her hand shook as she lowered the weapon. The soldier in her stirred. The loneliness of years cracked. The Brotherhood was waking. And for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. What do you say to the dead when they stand before you, breathing? Froze in the cabin doorway, her chest tight, her weapon heavy in her grip. The man before her was older, thinner, his shoulders bent by years she hadn't shared. But the eyes, she knew those eyes. Cole. He smiled faintly, the same crooked grin she remembered from nights on Overwatch, when silence stretched too long and humor was the only lifeline. Still pointing a gun at me, Hayes. Some things never change. Her arm trembled. Slowly she lowered the weapon. The weight of it felt unbearable. I saw you die. You saw me fall, he corrected softly. Big difference. Her breath hitched. The memory surged. The firefight, the collapse of stone and dust, his body disappearing beneath rubble. She had screamed his name through the comms, but no answer came. Days later, she had walked away believing he was gone. And now here he was. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her. The cabin smelled of wood rot and damp earth. A lantern flickered on the table. His pack leaned against the wall, worn but ready. 3 years, she whispered. 3.5, he said. I counted. Silence fell, heavy and raw. Both of them carried ghosts too thick for words. Finally she asked, who else? His expression darkened. A few, not enough, but more than none. The ache in her chest twisted. More than none. That meant she hadn't been the only one carrying the silence. Others had lived the same exile, the same invisibility, the same lie. She sat on the edge of the rough wooden table, staring at the lantern flame. So why now? Why did the signal go out? Cole leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes shadowed. Because someone wants us awake again. And whoever it is, they're not Brotherhood, they're pulling strings. Her stomach tightened. She had suspected it, but hearing it aloud cut deeper. Then we're pawns. No, he said firmly. We were never pawns, and we're not starting now. She wanted to believe him, but part of her remembered the voice on the phone, the silence in the line, the cold inevitability of being dragged back into a war that never ended. Cole studied her. You still have the look. What look? The one that says you hate being alive as much as you need to be. Her throat tightened. She turned away, hiding the burn in her eyes. At Fort Bridgewater, Harrison stood in the briefing room, the classified folder on the table before him. Senior staff sat in uneasy silence as he spoke. 2 survivors have made contact, Hayes and at least 1 more. A murmur rippled through the room. Some didn't even know what the Brotherhood was. Others had only heard rumors. Harrison cut them short with a raised hand. Don't bother asking how many more. We don't know. What we do know is that they're not supposed to exist, and if they're surfacing now, it's because someone wants them to. His aide asked carefully, Sir, are we threatened? Harrison paused. The question wasn't simple. Not yet, but I've read the files. I've seen what these soldiers can do. If they decide to turn, no perimeter we have will stop them. The silence grew heavier. Finally, another officer muttered, Then why not neutralize them now? Harrison's glare silenced him. Because they're not enemies. They were ours, and until someone proves otherwise, I'll treat them that way. leaned closer. "Sir, that may not be your choice much longer." He knew she was right. The pressure was building. Orders would come down, and when they did, they wouldn't be about compassion. Back in the cabin studied Cole across the table. His face was lined with weariness, but his eyes still carried that sharpness. The way he read every detail of the room, every shadow, every twitch. "What have you been doing all this time?" she asked. "Surviving, same as you." "And the others?" He shook his head. "Scattered, some wanted to stay hidden, some wanted revenge. A few couldn't live with the silence." She flinched. She knew what that meant. Too many scars, too much weight, the kind of wounds you couldn't bandage. Cole's voice softened. "You kept the patch, didn't you?" Her eyes flicked away. "Until yesterday." He smiled sadly. "That's more than I did." They sat in silence, memories thick in the air. The Brotherhood had been more than a unit. It had been family, and like all families, it had been broken by loss. Now fragments were finding each other again. But why? Ask the question that had been burning since the phone call. Who sent the signal? Cole's jaw tightened. "Not one of us. I traced what I could. Whoever it is, they've got reach, resources, and they're not doing this for our sake." "Then for what?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. Harrison sat alone after the briefing, staring at the insignia photograph again. He remembered once holding it in his hand, found near the ruins of a mission that had cost too much. The Brotherhood had been a weapon, precise, devastating, merciless when unleashed, and now fragments of that weapon were moving again. But he didn't see danger when he thought of Hayes. He saw sorrow. He saw someone who had wanted only to disappear, to live quietly, until recognition dragged her back into the fire. He wondered what kind of world demanded that of its soldiers. And he wondered if he had the courage to fight that world, even from inside it. Shifted restlessly in her chair. "So what now? We meet, reform, go back to being ghosts on command." Cole shook his head. "We don't obey commands anymore. If we come together, it'll be for us, not for them." She searched his eyes. "You really believe that?" "Don't you?" She wanted to. God, she wanted to. To think that survival meant more than just being used again. That maybe the Brotherhood could choose its own fate this time. But the scars on her arms, the nightmares she carried, the years of silence, they told her hope was fragile. Still, for the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight alone. And that, she realized, was its own kind of hope. At the base, Harrison stood at his window, night falling across the field. Recruits marched below, rifles on their shoulders, voices echoing in cadence. Ordinary soldiers. And somewhere out there, extraordinary ones. Ones who had already been asked to give too much. He whispered to the glass, words meant for no one but himself. "If you're out there, Hayes, choose carefully, because the world will make its choice for you if you don't." In the cabin, sat with Cole as silence stretched. The lantern flickered, shadows shifting across the walls. For the first time in years, she let herself ask the question she had buried deepest. "Do you ever wish we hadn't survived?" Cole's eyes softened. "Every day." She closed her eyes, the answer both comfort and curse. Because she felt the same. Yet here they were. Alive. Together again. And whether by choice or by force, the Brotherhood was waking. What happens when the past refuses to stay buried? Woke to the sound of footsteps crunching on the cabin's porch. Her hand closed around the weapon beside her, pulse spiking. Cole was already up, crouched near the window, eyes narrowed. 3 taps, paused, 2 taps. The old code. Cole opened the door cautiously, weapon still raised. A figure slipped inside, hood pulled low, face shadowed. For a tense moment, no one spoke. Then the hood came down. A woman, lean, weathered, eyes sharp, chest constricted. As she whispered, the sniper who had once taken the 2,900-meter shot that became legend among them. a mark of precision, patience, and cold fire. His knees weakened. She steadied herself against the table, was supposed to be gone too, buried with the rest. Yet here she was. Cole smiled grimly. Looks like we're not as extinct as they thought. Dropped her pack with a thud. Condition black reached me 2 days ago. I didn't believe it at first, thought it was bait. Then I traced the signal. It was one of ours, not command, not agency. Ours. Stomach twisted. Which one? Shook her head. No ID. Whoever lit the match stayed in the dark, but they wanted us to find each other, and now we have. Silence fell heavy, loaded. Looked between them. Coal, ghosts made flesh. The Brotherhood wasn't dead, not completely. And if 3 of them were alive, maybe more were too. The thought was both terrifying and electric. Why now? She asked. His eyes hardened. Because something coming, and they need soldiers who already know what it means to be ghosts. At Fort Bridgewater, Harrison sat alone in the secure comms room. The red phone on the desk blinked steadily, waiting for acknowledgement. He lifted the receiver. The voice on the other end was calm, detached, bureaucratic. General Harrison, authorization Tango 7. Effective immediately, you are to initiate containment of all known Brotherhood survivors. Harrison's grip tightened. Define containment. The pause was deliberate. Elimination of assets if voluntary compliance is not secured. His chest tightened. You're ordering me to kill them. They're destabilizing variables. You know their history. You know their capacity. This isn't optional. Harrison closed his eyes, jaw locked. These are soldiers, survivors. We buried them once already, and now you want me to finish the job. The voice was flat. This is national security, General. Personal feelings are irrelevant. A task force will be dispatched. You will provide support. The line clicked dead. Harrison set the phone down with shaking hands. For the first time in years, his duty tasted like ash in his mouth. Sat at the cabin table as brewed instant coffee over a camp stove. The bitter scent filled the air, grounding her, dragging her back to nights on deployment where silence was broken only by the click of a kettle and the low hum of comms chatter. For a moment, it almost felt like family again. But the illusion cracked when Cole spread a map across the table. Signals repeating every 48 hours, he said. Always a new coordinate. I've been following the trail. It's leading somewhere. Where? Asked. East, he said. Closer to the coast, closer to home. Traced the line with a finger. If this is real, others are moving too. We're converging without knowing it. His chest tightened. Convergence meant power, but it also meant visibility. A scattered handful of ghosts might vanish. But together they'd be a signal flare in the dark. And the world was watching. She whispered, they'll come for us. Cole met her eyes. Then let them. We didn't survive to run forever. But wasn't sure. Part of her longed to keep running, to vanish again into the anonymity she had lost. Yet another part, the soldier buried under years of silence, stirred at his words. She hated how much that part still wanted to fight. Harrison poured a drink in his quarters that night, the whiskey burning down his throat. His reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered. Elimination. That was the word they had used, as if soldiers were assets on a ledger to be crossed out when inconvenient. He thought of Hayes, the way she had moved on the range, invisible but precise, every gesture speaking of discipline she hadn't forgotten. He thought of the patch, worn in secret, carried like a wound. And he thought of the men giving orders now, men who had never crouched in dirt, never carried the silence of the dead on their shoulders. He whispered into the empty room, I won't do it. But even as the words left his lips, he knew the machine was bigger than him. A task force was already moving. Whether he obeyed or not, the hunt had begun. In the cabin, the 3 of them spoke quietly through the night. Stories surfaced, fragments of missions no one else remembered, names etched into silence. Laughter came once or twice, brittle but real. Yet beneath it all was the same question, unspoken but constant. Why us? Why now? At dawn, shouldered her pack. The next coordinate drops in 6 hours. If we move fast, we can intercept whoever else is following. Looked at her, then at Cole. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to stay, to cling to the fragile reunion, to the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone anymore. But war had no patience for comfort. She nodded, then we move. At Fort Bridgewater, stepped into Harrison's office. Her face was pale. Sir, I just received confirmation. The task force has boots on the ground. They're moving east. Harrison's gut twisted. East, toward the coast, toward Hayes. They'll track them, whispered. They'll corner them. Harrison clenched his fists. Orders were orders. But for the first time in his career, he felt the weight of disobedience pressing against him. If he stayed silent, the Brotherhood would be erased again. If he interfered, he would brand himself a traitor. He thought of the recruits on his base, training, trusting. He thought of Hayes, carrying scars he couldn't see. And he knew the line between duty and justice was breaking. Hiked with Cole and through the trees, the morning light slanting through branches, the silence heavy with memory. Every step felt like walking deeper into the past. At a ridge, raised binoculars scanning the valley below. Convoy, she murmured. Froze. 2 armored SUVs. A dozen men in tactical gear, moving deliberately. Not random, not local. They were already being hunted. Cole swore under his breath. Task force has to be. His chest tightened. She thought of the recruits on the range, laughing, carefree. She thought of the insignia patch she had burned. She thought of the quiet life she had tried to build. And she realized the truth. Peace had never been hers to keep. She lowered her voice. They've already chosen for us. His eyes narrowed. Then we choose back. Harrison stood at the window, watching dawn break across the base. He thought of orders waiting on his desk. He thought of the hunt already unfolding. And he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. He had built a career on obedience. But obedience, he realized, was just another word for silence. And silence had buried enough soldiers already. He turned from the window, jaw set. For the first time in decades, he was about to break the oath that had defined him. Because some ghosts deserved more than elimination. They deserved to be heard. What happens when ghosts refuse to die a second time? Crouched behind the ridge with Cole and eyes fixed on the convoy crawling through the valley. 2 SUVs, black paint glinting in the sun, armed men riding inside. The sight stirred something deep in her chest, the inevitability of a hunt, the memory of being on the other side of it. They know we're here, Cole murmured. Or they will soon, said, lowering her binoculars. Either way, it's not a coincidence. His grip tightened on the rifle she had pulled from her duffel. She hadn't touched one in years, not really, not with intent. But her body remembered. The weight, the balance, the way silence stretched when you were waiting for a target to come into focus. Her heart clenched. She didn't want this, not again. But the convoy rolled on, a reminder that choice was an illusion. They'll box us in, Cole said. Standard containment, push us east, cut off exits, force us into open ground. Swallowed, so what's the play? Cole's eyes flicked to hers. We don't run, not this time. The words hit her harder than gunfire. Running had kept her alive. Running had kept her invisible. Running had given her 3 years of quiet mornings and unremarkable evenings. But running hadn't freed her. She exhaled slowly. Then we stand. At Fort Bridgewater, Harrison stared at the operations feed streaming across his secure monitor. The task force was moving east, coordinated, methodical, relentless. He had been ordered to provide support, to funnel intelligence, to tighten the noose. But his cursor hovered over the keyboard, frozen. entered quietly. "Sir, are we assisting them?" Harrison didn't answer. His throat was dry, his hands heavy. Stepped closer. "If we don't, command will notice. They'll know you're stalling." "I know." "Then why hesitate?" He turned, eyes sharp. "Because these aren't enemies, they're soldiers who gave everything we asked, and now we're repaying them with bullets." His jaw worked, torn between protocol and conscience. "If you refuse, it'll cost you your career." "Then it'll cost me," Harrison said flatly. "I won't bury them again." And with those words, he shut down the feed. The convoy slowed at a fork in the valley road. Men spilled from the SUVs, black gear gleaming, weapons raised. They moved like predators, precise, silent, sure. Watched through the scope, her breath steady, her body remembering old rhythms. She could end this. One shot, clean, controlled. But her finger trembled on the trigger. She whispered to herself, "You wanted peace. You wanted silence. Don't throw it away." Beside her adjusted her rifle, calm as stone. "Say the word." His chest ached. The word, the decision, life or death. Cole's voice broke the silence. "They won't stop. Not until we're gone. So ask yourself, is this survival or surrender?" The words cut deep, because she knew the answer. She lowered her eye to the glass. At Fort Bridgewater, alarms blared softly in Harrison's office. Command was calling, demanding updates, demanding compliance. He ignored them. Instead, he opened a secure channel, one buried deep, one that hadn't been used in years. His voice was low, steady. "Hayes, if you can hear this, you're not alone. Do what you must to survive, but know this, someone in uniform remembers. Someone still sees you as more than an asset." He ended the transmission before anyone could intercept. For the first time in his career, he felt like he had spoken as a man, not just a general. In the valley, the task force fanned out, sweeping the tree line. Orders crackled in their comms, voices sharp and efficient. Exhaled, finger steady now. She wasn't shooting for vengeance. She wasn't shooting for glory. She was shooting because peace had been taken from her, and she wasn't going to let them erase her twice. The first shot cracked through the morning air. A clean hit, center chest. A man crumpled without a sound. The valley erupted in chaos. Fired next, precise, surgical. 2 targets down before the rest even registered the direction. Cole shifted position, drawing their fire, moving like a man who had done this his whole life. His pulse thundered, but her breathing was calm. Each shot was deliberate, controlled. She didn't waste rounds, she didn't miss. But with each trigger pull, her heart broke a little more. Because every man falling below was a soldier too, following orders, believing in their mission, just as she once had. At the base, burst into Harrison's office. "Sir, the task force is taking casualties, heavy ones. Command is demanding air support." Harrison's chest tightened. Air support would turn the valley into a massacre. Survivors or not, the Brotherhood wouldn't stand against drones and missiles. He slammed his hand on the desk. "No, I won't authorize it." "Sir, you don't have that choice." "I do," Harrison snapped. "As long as I sit in this chair, I do." Stared at him, torn. "Then you're declaring war on your own command." "No," Harrison said softly. "I'm declaring loyalty to the soldiers they abandoned." Smoke drifted through the valley. The firefight was brutal, relentless. The Brotherhood fought like phantoms, moving through cover, striking from angles the task force couldn't anticipate. But numbers pressed in, ammunition thinned, the noose tightened. Crouched behind a boulder, blood on her arm, sweat in her eyes, Cole's voice rang out through the chaos. "We can't hold this forever." Fired again, face grim. "Then we break through." Swallowed hard, the thought of running again burned. But this wasn't retreat, it was survival, the only way forward. She looked at Cole then, "On my mark." They nodded, trust unspoken, forged years ago, unbroken even now. Rose fired 3 shots in rapid succession, then sprinted down the ridge. Cole followed, covering their movements sharp, synchronized. The valley roared with gunfire, but somehow, impossibly, they cut through the line. And then, like smoke, they were gone. At Fort Bridgewater, the reports poured in. Casualties, survivors uncontained, mission compromised. Command demanded answers. Harrison stood at his window, watching the recruits march, his face unreadable. When asked, "What do we tell them?" he only said, "The truth, that ghosts don't die easy." Night fell on the forest miles from the valley. Sat by a small fire, her arm bandaged, her rifle across her knees. Cole and rested nearby, their silence heavy but alive. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. The Brotherhood wasn't gone, not yet. But the price of that truth weighed heavy. She stared into the flames, her voice barely a whisper. "We'll never have peace, will we?" Cole looked at her, eyes steady. "Maybe not, but we'll have each other." Added softly, "And sometimes that's enough." Let the words sink in. Maybe peace wasn't silence. Maybe peace was the courage to stand, even when the world wanted you erased. She lifted her gaze to the stars above, her voice carrying into the dark. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The fire cracked softly, the night deepened, and the ghosts of the Brotherhood kept watch, alive, unbroken, unforgotten.